a bit of an overview of the operational activity that is currently taking place at Walleys Quarry landfill. Many of you have probably read that there has been some further temporary capping that's been taking place on site over the past month, and that's using an application product called PosiShell, which was imported in from the US. This has been taking place in terms of the application activity over the past 4 weeks. And here's just a couple of slides of pictures just showing whereabouts that application has been taking place. This material, this product acts as what we kind of call as temporary capping material. So this isn't something that will stay in place and in situ for long term. That will obviously be covered over and superseded as they start to reprofile those flanks with permanent capping. But in the meantime, this was an identified area of where fugitive emissions was coming through the surface. And this was something that we had instructed the operator to basically do temporary capping on to contain those gas emissions. They have obviously been applying this over, it's around about 17,000 square metres of surface. And once this has all been completed, which will be done so in the next couple of days, there's just been a slight delay with the final last few areas being covered due to unfortunate wet weather, which has meant that it meant that the product couldn't be delayed. Couldn't be applied, sorry, so there has been a delay. But that will be done, and that will then mean that 70%, approximately 70% of the landfill site will have either permanent or temporary capping in place. What the operator has also been instructed to carry out is what we kind of call a surface emissions survey. So that will give us some readings in terms of how successful and effective that PosiShell application has been. They are carrying out those surveys this week, and we should be seeing that data shortly afterwards. And when we do receive that data, we will obviously publicise that and be able to show the effectiveness of what that has had with regards to those fugitive emissions. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So the other kind of main area of operational activity that's currently underway is the drilling of gas collection wells on site. So in total, there are 28 wells that are being drilled. This is throughout the landfill. Some are being drilled into the existing kind of waste that is there. Some other wells are being put in place for future waste that will be obviously going into site as it starts to arrive. So the drilling of the wells is due to take place over this month, and the current time frame is for it to be completed by the end of October. Again, there's obviously conditions around that time frame based on things like weather and any operational kind of mechanical situations that could occur that may cause delays. But again, the operator has been instructed to keep to the deadlines as much as possible, and we're obviously keeping a very close eye on the progress of those drilling of the gas wells. What the wells obviously are there to do are there to capture obviously the gas that's being produced inside the landfill, and all those wells are being connected to the gas utilization plant. So the gas utilization plant is where the gases are destroyed, in effect, either being turned into energy or any surplus gas being burnt off by the flares. So this is obviously a very key piece of work, as is the PosiShell, where the PosiShell is obviously containing the gas wells obviously capturing the gas, and then onto the gas utilization plant where it destroys. And that's always been our strong regulatory approach with the operator around our strategy of contain, capture and destroy. And then just the picture to the right there is just to kind of give some showing of other activities that the operator has done. There's been recent reports around the pests, so birds, seagulls on the landfill site, and that's just a picture of an air cannon bird scarer that they have installed to minimise the pest and putting something proactive in place of pest management. And also there's the deodorizer spray that you can see in action there, and that goes round the site, landfill site on the edge. And that is there as a demister. Demister spray is there that can help deal with some of the dust element side of things, and some demisters also contain, in this case, at Walleys Quarry, a fragrance as well to help with some of the odours. So if we can just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the air quality monitoring data, I've put on here just the latest levels that we publicise on a weekly basis. So there are 4 air quality monitoring units that are around the landfill site, and you can see they've obviously got a code name, but also the location of where they are. Those percentages relate to the amount of time in the given week, in this case the 20th to the 26th of September, where the levels of hydrogen sulfide has been recorded above the nuisance level, and that nuisance level is set to 7 micrograms per cubic metre. As you can see, there's obviously the highest percentage at the Gallingale View, MFF9. That has always been the area, for us, the area that always has shown the highest percentage. These obviously percentages do change week on week, and that's always updated on our citizen space page. With regards to the longer air quality monitoring data, a colleague, Alec Dobney from UKHSA, in some slides further down, will give a bit more detail around the kind of monthly data and where that has been and where it is going with hydrogen sulfide levels. Just a couple other things just to report on. So again, just reporting numbers for the latest week. We had 797 reports come into us from the 20th to the 26th of September. And to the right, to the top bar graph, you can see that over a month-by-month basis, there's the total number of reports that we have received onto our call centre, and that's either through the telephone hotline, emails where people are reporting to us, or our fairly new online reporting form. You can see that the peak of reports came in May. And then obviously from there onwards, month by month, we have seen reporting numbers decrease. Some of you may be aware that there was some questions around some of the NERS, our report numbers, our National Incident Recording System, NERS report numbers being very low over a particular week, and that week being the 30th of August to the 5th of September. We have done a complete data review of that week and all other weeks, and what we had found that with the new online reporting system that we put in place, the system itself uses what we call a robot. So the robot goes through a number of checks with regards to the information that's being sent to us. We found that there was 248 reports that had come through the robot where the date and time of the reported incident by the member of public using the online form was not being used as the correct date stamp time for when it went onto the system. So, for example, where someone had reported an incident to us on the 5th of September, by the time that the robot had got through the process and had completed putting that onto the system, it did a completed date by the 7th of September, and therefore it actually entered in the 7th of September as the date and time that that incident was reported to us. We've obviously reran those data numbers, and we've actually now got the correct numbers all in place with the right dates and times issued to them. And we've now taken steps to make sure that the robot is not going to do that issue again. So we've rectified the data numbers, particularly for that low number reporting week. It has increased from 69 reports, which was the initial number that was reported, up to 129. With regards to the gas capture, again, you can see with the bar chart on the right-hand side, overall there is a general trend of gas capture increasing on month by month. That is down to the work that obviously we've instructed the operator to carry out with regards to capping and to drilling. The current figures is now showing just 3,000 cubic meters per hour of gas being captured on site, and that is almost double the figure of what we were seeing towards November and December of last year. I believe that's the end of my slides, so I'm not sure if we're taking questions now or towards the end.
Thank you, Marc. We're going to take questions at the end because we're going to have all the presentations first, but thank you for that, Marc. What I neglected to do was I actually introduced it as earlier on as Health and Safety Executive when I meant Public Health England. So Alec Dobney is the representative from Health and will be giving a presentation later. So if everybody's okay, we'll move on to the next presentation, which I believe is from the police.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. So I'm Chief Superintendent Carl Ratcliffe. I am the Silver Commander for the operation that we are currently running at various locations, which include Walleys Quarry and also at Red Industries headquarters up off Berkeley Court in particular. So as a Silver Commander, it's my responsibility to pay due regard, obviously, to how we police such issues, and we guided through this through, as you'd expect, national training, national accreditation through the College of Policing. And I thought it would be useful tonight just to share some core principles that we work from, just so I can talk those through briefly with you and give you some information that hopefully will reassure you around our current approach. So core principles. So the Silver Commander, I'm responsible to the Gold Commander. I'll run through that in a second on a different slide, where I decide on the policing style and tone. So in other words, how we deal with the protest, blockade and any other information that we receive. The way that we communicate with local communities and other stakeholders. The command structure that I put in place to enable it to run efficiently and effectively. How I do that through the use of something that we call the National Decision Model and also the Disorder Model that I'll show you in a second, to make sure that any response that we do have to any reported incidents is proportionate and have the use of the correct resources in terms of numbers and also the way that they're trained and the skills that they have. So I'll have the next slide, please, Cristian. Thank you. So in terms of command structure, the Gold Public Order and Public Safety, that's POPS, Public Order and Public Safety Commander, is Temporary Deputy Chief Constable Justin Bibby. I act as his Silver Commander in relation to this particular operation, and then reporting directly to me as part of that command structure are two themes. First of all, most of you will know Chief Inspector Phil Duffy, who's the local policing team commander here at Newcastle Borough, and his local policing team resources. And then to the left-hand side of that command structure, the public order, public safety type resources that will also report to me in terms of a bronze ground commander that I deploy up at the scenes, and also those specialist policing and protest resources. So we operate in what's called a gold, silver and bronze command structure. that, as you can imagine, well tried and tested in terms of how we deal with things. Next slide, please, Cristian. So I made reference to this. This is the national decision model. And again, we use this particularly with public order and public safety events because it gives us the opportunity to follow a set process. So I'll just read what's in those boxes because I'll have to put my specs on as well. So whenever I'm considering how we react to information or intelligence that comes in, how we're going to police an incident, whether or not that's a protest or a public safety event, the first thing I'll do in that top box there is gather all the available information and intelligence that I can get. That'll be through liaison with the community, liaison with the protest organisers, through what we call open source material, in other words, what's available through social media and other internet sites in particular. And also on occasions, if anybody wants to talk to us covertly around what may or may not be happening. Once I've done that and I've got as much information and intelligence as I can, then I assess threat and risk and develop what we call a working strategy. So I ascertain through that information and intelligence, for example, if there's going to be any pre-planned disorder or any kind of pre-planned criminality. And dependent on the number of people that may or may not be involved, the types of offences that are being planned or may be committed, then I conduct a risk assessment and develop what's called a working strategy, where I look at how I'm going to keep people safe and deal with what issues officers and other members of the public and individuals may come across. Once I've done that, I consider what powers and policies I'm going to use. I'll come to a legislation slide a little bit further through the presentation. So in other words, what offences may people commit and what powers has the police or others got at the fingertips to be able to deal with it. Identify options and contingencies. So this is when I decide how we're going to police a particular event. How many officers I'm going to deploy to it, what tactics I'm going to deploy, and what contingencies I'll have to one side. In other words, extra resources that I may not initially deploy, but keep back at some rendezvous point should I need them. And then take action and review what's happened. So actually deal with the incident and then review how it went and if it went well or whether or not there's any lessons to be learned from it. And that is a continual cycle. I will use that model up to 10, 12 times in a particular incident, continually reviewing the information that's coming in and moving that forward. At the heart of that is the code of ethics. That is the standards that policing adheres to. And of course, there's no surprise in there, things such as impartiality, fairness, legitimacy, and making sure that the service that we provide is as fair and balanced as it can be. Sometimes, obviously, with issues like this in quite emotive and difficult circumstances. Next slide, please, Cristian. Disorder model, we'll touch on this slightly. So if, for instance, an incident moves from a state of normality. So today, I'd suggest, although I've been at Stafford for most of the day, Newcastle is in a state of normality at the moment. In other words, there's nothing happening out of the ordinary and everybody is going about the business quite freely without any interruption. So in terms of, if we take the Walleys Quarry incident, I've described that even with the issues that have been raised, the community is still in a state of normality, but a new normality for the community, one that has changed and that we recognise. But what it hasn't done is moved into tension, disorder, serious disorder, or unrest. So there may be on occasions during a blockade where we certainly move towards tension, and it's our job to make sure that that is de-escalated as quickly as possible. And it's much harder to de-escalate something than to escalate it, using obviously communication skills, the right type of resource, so that we can again bring things back to a state of normality. But at the moment, in liaison with Phil Duffy, he advises me on community tension through an impact assessment that he does. He tells me that at the moment we're still at a state of normality. Next slide, please. And then legislative considerations. So this is the type of legislation that as a public order commander I consider when dealing with issues. No surprise would be the Public Order Act. Shouting, swearing, threats of violence are usually covered within that, all the way up to riot, which obviously is the highest level that we could move to. Section 241 of the Trade Union and Labour Relations Act is another piece of legislation that we can use in these circumstances, along with obstruction under the Highways Act, whilst being cognizant, of course, of people's human rights under the various articles, which is obviously very topical amongst protesters and with discussions in the media as well. So those are the considerations that I put to it as a public order commander, and I'm sure there may be some questions for me at the end of this first session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Moving now to Richard Harding from the County Council.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the map you can see in front of you shows the latest results from the County Council's symptom tracker. People do continue to report odour and symptoms, albeit in small numbers. And if there's anything colleagues can do to raise awareness of this and allow more people to report, that would be great. We have about 2,200 reports so far. That's since the symptom tracker was opened sometime in the late spring. Most of those are coming from within 3 miles of Walleys Quarry. And the area on your screen approximates to the wards of Silverdale, Thistlebury, Westlands, Clayton, Nutton, Maybank, Town and Cross Heath. We do know how distressing this is for residents. The Public Health England expert assessment remains that the risk to long-term physical health is low. However, there is concern about the duration of the situation and that cumulative exposure does erode the margin of safety. It is encouraging that in the last few weeks, the air quality monitoring shows hydrogen sulfide levels on a general downward trend. From a health perspective, we need that trend to continue and for levels to come back down, ideally within the next few weeks. Thank you.
Moving to our next presentation, which is Martin next to me.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Members will be aware that in August, the Council served an abatement notice on Walleys Quarry Limited, and this is the prime action that we're able to take in terms of enforcement, which is to identify and agree that the odours coming from the site amount to a statutory nuisance, and therefore serve a notice on the operator requiring that they abate the nuisance. Now, the approach we took to that was such that we give Walleys Quarry Limited 5 months to abate the nuisance within the notice that was served. And that time, one of the critical things here for us is in serving an abatement notice, we need to be seen to be allowing a reasonable time for the operator to do what it needs to do to bring the situation back into normal. The abatement notice process allows 21 days for appeal, and we expected that the notice would be appealed, and indeed it was. 2nd of December, an appeal was lodged with the Magistrates Court. There are a number of grounds that an appeal can be lodged on, and we were expecting that there would be an appeal on multiple grounds, and indeed there were. So the Walleys Quarry appeal is on the basis that the odours do not amount to a statutory nuisance, that there is some defect or error in our notice, that the time for bringing the nuisance, for abating the nuisance, is actually not reasonable. 5 months is too short. And also that they are already using what's called best practical means. So that is the best techniques balanced against affordability on the site. So that has the effect of stopping the clock on that 5-month process while we go through the appeal process. The first part of that will be a case management hearing at the Magistrates Court, where we will be exploring the length of time that it will take to hear the case, the range of information that will be required from all parties to this, and also, you know, how we go about actually bringing this matter to a resolution. Now, that first part, the case management hearing, is effectively an administrative part of the process, but it does get the ball rolling in terms of the court process. So the earlier we can get this, the better. We did, I suppose a couple of weeks ago now, we had some hope. So last week there was the possibility of having a hearing on the 28th of September to have that initial hearing. Unfortunately, Walleys Quarry Limited's legal team weren't available on that day, so we are back at the stage of waiting for a date to come through from the Magistrates Court to hear that. We expect that the appeal process will take a number of months to work its way through the court, and as I say, while that happens, the clock has stopped in terms of that 5-month period. While that goes on, we continue to work with our partners in the LRF through the strategic coordinating group to marshal efforts to try and minimise the impact of the odours. One of the things that we are doing as part of that is the council has bought 2 Jerome handheld monitors, which we're actually using in the community so that we can monitor the level of hydrogen sulfide in individual homes. Obviously, this is very much on a sample basis, but it is part of the process of continuing to monitor the picture that's evolving. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Bring in Alex now from Public Health.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. Good evening. My name's Alec Dobney. I am a unit head in UK Health Security Agency's Environmental Hazards and Emergencies Department. We are 4 days into the new organisation, formerly Public Health England, but just to reassure councillors, we are the same staff and members that have been dealing with Quarry from its inception, and will continue to do that in the new organisation. Tonight I've been asked just to talk a little bit about the Strategic Coordination Group Contingency Planning, because this has essentially been based upon some of the work that UK Health Security Agency did as part of our risk assessment. So we set out during this year from the inception of monitoring some reducing trigger levels based around the hydrogen sulfide concentrations to be achieved by the end of this year. And this was in recognition that some of those health-based standards will change over time from acute to intermediate to longer term, and recognising that after a year, the concentrations for some of those health-based guidance values are quite low. So recognising that we need to move towards those is something that we noted from the beginning. So 3 scenarios have been based upon the trigger level that we set out, and this is something that the Strategic Coordination Group has been developing. In their simplicity, in the simplistic form, they are 1, that concentrations continue to reduce, and we've recognised that that's the case over the last few months. Levels of concentrations are coming down month on month, and I'll show some charts just to recognise that, but they need to get back to a level where we're confident that there'll be no long-term health impacts associated with that. And so there's health-based guidance values that we need to get down to. And if we get back to those guideline values and we have some assurance around those guideline values, then this incident can get into a position of stability, and we can get into recovery, and we can get back to normality with a lot of, I'm sure, with a lot of assurance around some of those messages. The second scenario is recognizing that the concentrations don't come down to those guideline values, and they may just hover around the lower end of concentration, so below 10 micrograms, but above 2 micrograms. And recognizing that actions, messages, decisions will need to be made around that scenario. And then scenario 3 is recognizing if there's an increase in concentrations over time, whether that be chronic levels or acute levels, which we saw back in March and April. And it's really important that the strategic coordination group looks at all of those scenarios and plans accordingly for any one of those scenarios. So this is where the contingency planning now sits with those scenario plans, and recognizing that we will only ever be in one of those scenarios. Hopefully we'll be in the lowest scenario, and we'll be working our way towards recovery. But recognizing that if things do escalate at any point in time, then there are plans in place, contingency plans in place, both to have actions on each of the coordinating cells within the SCG, the messages, the services that we provide, the risk assessment that we have to do, and recognizing all of those things are within that contingency planning. So it's quite detailed work. It's in development at the moment. SCG are working on it, and that work is coming together quite well. So the next slide, if we could move on, Cristian, please. Just some recognition of the concentrations that have been measured month by month, which form the basis for the data which goes into UKHSA's risk assessment. And you can see month on month, the concentrations have been coming down. As Marc noted earlier in the meeting, concentrations around Gallingale View, which is MMF9 in this chart, is the area where we've had most concern over the concentrations. At the other monitoring locations, MMF1, 2 and 6, so that's the cemetery, Silverdale Lane, and the fire station, you can see now in August, we are below 2 micrograms per cubic metre, which is the health-based standard for longer term lifetime health. So we just need to see Gallingale View concentrations come down. It's currently at about 4.5, I think it is. Next slide, please, Cristian. And Marc also mentioned that we have, we review the concentrations which are above the World Health Organization's odour annoyance level of 7 micrograms. And again, you can see here, over time since March, April, concentrations have been coming down at all sites. And no surprise that Gallingale View is trailing behind, with the concentrations being highest at that monitoring location and in that local population. But again, MMF 1, 2 and 6, we're beginning to see that those concentrations are leading to, lower concentrations are leading to less time, less percentage of time where concentrations are above that audit guideline value, and therefore hopefully we'll begin to see some of those complaints begin to drop off as people don't get impacted as much by those concentrations. And that's it from me, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Over then to Cristian, who's going to talk about the community engagement.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, members will be aware that over the summer there have been several virtual community engagement events held by strategic coordinating group partners to update local people, and also offer an opportunity for people to ask questions they might have about the ongoing situation or the health impact of it. For some time we've been looking to hold a face-to-face public event, giving people the opportunity to come into a drop-in event to have those conversations with officers from the respective agencies. And as you will be aware, the first of those is taking place tomorrow at Bradwell Lodge Community Centre, and there'll be a further event next Tuesday as well, where we'll have representatives from the Environment Agency, UKHSA, the county and borough councils and the police, all on hand to speak to members of the public and again answer any questions they might have about the ongoing work to eliminate the odours and also any concerns they might have about the health impacts as well. We did look to sort of venues slightly closer to the quarry in more of the affected communities, but we had some issues in terms of finding a suitable venue that was available on the dates in question, which is why we opted for Bradwell Lodge in the end. And in terms of promoting the events, one of the key factors was making sure that those people, particularly who are not on social media, are not digitally enabled, that they're well aware of the events as well. So letters have been sent out to some 17,000 homes in the area to both promote the events, but also to provide updated health advice as well. And the events have been well promoted across media, social media, and through stakeholders as well. Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Cristian. So we thought it was really important that we did get all the partners to give a statement first. If we ask questions after the first one from the area, we probably might be still answering questions at this point. So it was important that we got everybody in, but this gives us now a good 20 minutes for questions if required. Would ask those people in the room, if they've got a question to ask, please, when you do ask it, put your mic on, because or else those online will not be able to hear. And if you could address towards which partner your question is. For those online, same situation, some people have already done it already, is please show your hands in the hands up column, and I will bring you in. And then remember to put your hand down after, and also to mute your mic as well after you've asked your question. But I'll go first one to Councillor Mike Stubbs, who's online. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. This is directed towards the police representative. I think we all know that it's an incredibly difficult job standing between the organisation and members of the public. But in your presentation, you went through the various sections that you're allowed to use. Now, Section 241 is specifically around trade unions. I've asked 5 of the major trade unions around Newcastle and Stoke-on-Trent if they've had any organised events at the quarry, and they have not. Is it not a misuse of that Section 241 to be actually trying to use that against members of the public that are not there as trade union representatives or part of a trade union action? I just want to direct yes or no on that, really. Thank you, Chair.
Paul?
Okay, thanks, Councillor. You'll appreciate it is difficult to give a direct yes or no at times with the length of the question. However, I will try to keep it as succinct as I can. We of course recognise, as I said, it's a really emotive issue. It is a really difficult issue to police and to command. I would prefer officers from Staffordshire Police not to be involved in this whatsoever, and to carry on with business as usual, policing the communities across Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire, as I think most people would expect us to be doing. However, when we do police protest and difficult issues like this, as you would expect, we seek quite thorough legal advice on how to proceed. The legal advice that I've received so far is that that particular piece of legislation is appropriate for the circumstances, and as such, individuals have been charged with offences in relation to specific events that have occurred over various dates. So we'll wait and see what the court cases themselves bring. Probably best not commenting any further on that because obviously they are live court cases at the moment. But as you would expect, just to reiterate, we do seek quite robust legal advice before we take action.
Okay, next is Julie Cooper in the room.
Hold it down. Can you hear me now? That's it. Right. My question is to the Environmental Agency. you say you've got temporary capping. When is that temporary capping becoming permanent? Because if it's the smelling is going down now with the temporary capping, so when are you going to make it permanent? Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Address that to the A, either Clare or Marc.
Yes, thanks for the question, Councillor. So in terms of all landfill sites, when we do capping, the first step will be to do temporary capping. And as I said, the name is there, is that it will be a temporary measure. Permanent capping will take place once the reprofiling of the area that does need a permanent capping has been completed. Now, reprofiling means that sometimes normally additional waste will go on to make that capping achievable. So there will be a plan that is in place for the whole of the capping of Walleys landfill, and it will take place sequentially when the reprofiling happens. The point with the posi shell and why that was put in place, and you may have seen from the pictures that were up on the slides, it was a very steep flank side. So normal temporary capping measures would have taken far longer to do than applying posi shell. Posi shell is a material that can be sprayed on and then sets hard like concrete so that it stops the gas coming through from the ground up into the atmosphere, but also stops rainwater going in and going into the soil. So it's a very effective material to be used. So in terms of what you saw from the posi shell, that will be an area that will be capped. And once that is done, that will be utilising the normal method of permanent capping, which is utilising membrane and particular clay soil that is used across landfill sites within the country. In question 2, when will that take place? That will be done as part of the kind of permanent capping plan that the site operator has. And that will take place, as I said, sequentially when the landfill fills up with future waste going into the site.
Question we get asked a lot by residents particularly is the issue of obviously trust that the work will be done to the correct level and the correct consistency across the site. Can you explain how the A is taking part in testing that this posi shell has been put in place and all the other measures that you're doing on site?
So with regards to the posi shell and also temporary capping and permanent capping, there's what's called a construction quality assurance, or CQA. So these are reports that are produced by professionals in those qualifications to be able to look at that. So the posi shell is having that independent CQA carried out to ensure that that has been deployed and applied correctly and is having the effect it should do. And that's also the same that is done for temporary and permanent capping when that is carried out. So one of the large pieces of capping that did take place in terms of permanent capping at April time, there has been a huge report produced around the CQA of that to ensure that that has been done correctly, and we're obviously assessing that report, and we'll be obviously publicising what we found from that. But at the moment, everything from our perspective is looking as if, you know, that has been done in the correct format, in the correct way, and is obviously having you know, a positive impact, as we've seen from some of the data that's been produced with regards to the hydrogen sulfide levels in particular dropping down on a month-by-month basis, and the gas capturing also going up at the same time.
Okay, Councillor Taggart, if I can, it's Clare Dinnis here. I'll just add to that. Even in between those points where we are taking that formal assurance, Walleys Quarry Limited have also been doing some regular surface emission surveys themselves, which we then get the results of as well. And what that helps us to do is to understand, as the works are happening and when some smaller pieces of work are happening, what the impact of that has been and whether that has been what we would expect, so that if it hasn't, we don't have to wait until we get to a formal assessment point, but rather can add additional actions immediately.
Thank you, Claire. Andrew Fox-Hewitt online.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I've got a few questions. I've got 3 for Claire or Marc, and then a couple for Staffordshire Police. So the 3 questions for the Environment Agency. Number 1, having spoken to the owners and operators at Walleys, I was particularly interested in how the effectiveness and efficiency of the gas monitoring is measured. And they informed me that there is no real recording equipment on the gas monitoring, such as telemetry, when I asked about it. So question 1 is, why are we not enforcing any kind of recording of how effective that equipment is in reducing and managing the gas extraction? Question number 2 is, why are we not taking core samples on the site? That's repeatedly been requested by members of the community, and indeed, speaking to Walleys, they said that they've got no objections to on-the-spot core samples being taken. That's particularly important to give trust in what's been tipped on the site. And question number 3, I appreciate you've put out a bit of a briefing statement, but if you could just explain the principal reasoning behind appealing the recent court judgment that's been given with relation to reducing the HS levels. Thank you.
Should we stop there for the moment and let the EA answer those? So either Clare or Marc, over to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'll come in onto the first 2 questions, and I think Clare will come in onto the third, if that's okay. So with regards to the first question around continuous monitoring, so the gas utilisation plant is something that we have had careful consideration around in terms of the effectiveness and efficiency of that piece of equipment on site. And as we've always said, that there has been situations of the emissions of the odour possibly coming not just from the landfill and from the ground through fugitive emissions, but potentially from that source. What we did is that we will, what we have done is we have carried an instruction and actually served notice onto not the operator, but actually the gas management company, so CLP. So they're the company that operate the actual gas machinery. So in terms of the wells and the extraction of the gas, and then the converting it into energy or burning the gas is done by CLP. And we sent a notice on them to actually put telemetry onto that gas utilisation plant, continuous telemetry that gives us data 24/7. That was instructed onto them to complete by the end of August, which they have done. And that is now giving us very useful information around the amount of gas that is going through there, and any gas that is potentially escaping into the atmosphere, and also giving us information around any issues that the machinery may be having, in particular the engines that may turn off unexpectedly, that give us very informative data to give us an indication that there may be some effectiveness that is not happening there, and therefore they need to be looking at what can be put in place to rectify those issues. So in terms of the telemetry, that is happening. In terms of the amount of gas that's being captured, again, that's something that was always been sent to us. That's data that is given to us by the gas management company, and that gives us the ability to see how much gas is being drawn off on a daily basis. That then gives us that kind of cubic meters per hour average for each month in the graph that I showed earlier on the slides. Hopefully that answers that question. With regards to the sampling, we've been speaking with the operator around the opportunity for them to take samples, and for them to employ a consultant to come in to look at that. And they have come back to me and have said that they have got a consultant in, a company that specialises in this type of work, MJCA. It's a very reputable company that does analysis in this type of material that comes from the ground to analyse what is there. So the operator is looking to now set up those sampling, which they will then get the consultant to do, to produce a report, and that obviously will be shared with us, and then that will be obviously made further aware once that work has been carried out. they will obviously be sending us, in terms of that data and information. They will be looking at, taking those samples from the different places that they are obviously drilling now on site. So hopefully that answers the question around if sampling is being taken or not. And then I'll hand over to Claire to answer question 3 about the judicial review.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Councillor Fox-Hewitt. So as you said, I'm limited as to what I can say about the judicial review, but I think I can answer your question. And really the important bit is that nothing about our appeal is because we don't take the judgment seriously, or because we aren't doing everything we can to get down to the levels that Alec Dobney spoke about from PHE, which are equivalent to the standard that's in the judicial review. That's absolutely not what is in question at all. We are doing and were doing and continue to do everything we can to reduce those levels, get the operator to reduce those levels as quickly as possible. The question of appeal is a specific one in relation to the role of the court, and the court specifically at judicial review, in terms of how it can instruct regulatory decisions and the details around that. There will be more detail on that as and when that leave for appeal is made, but nothing about that appeal is halting any work on site or changing the work that we are tasking the operator to do.
Before you come in, Andrew, for your follow-up one, we have 7 speakers who've indicated they want to speak, so we may be overrunning. No, that's okay with all of the partners, but if we could, Andrew, you could address your question now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark and Claire, for those answers. They were the first 2 were particularly insightful, so thank you. I would say, with respect, you may not like this, but it does seem as though the approach being taken is to allow the operator to mark its own homework to a certain extent. We're allowing them to, or we were allowing them to measure their own gas sampling and extraction, and we're allowing them to mark their own sampling. I'm not sure that that's in the interests of the community, but I'm sure I'll leave that there. The questions to Staffordshire Police are, under the Section 241 of the Trade Union Labour Relations Act, could you just expand a little bit on which subsections A to E we're arresting protesters under, and by extension to that, in the interest of transparency and public trust, are we able to publish the legal advice that's been obtained? That's question 1. And question 2, and I'll set a bit of context. I have been down on a number of the protests, and I will say that the officers have been very, very conciliatory and convivial in their interactions with the community. It's been very good-natured in the policing. However, a lot of the frustrations are that protesters are being arrested, yet we don't seem to be working with VOSA, for example, to check the state of the vehicles coming into the site. We're not checked. There's issues with MOTs, issues with insurance, issues with the roadworthiness of the vehicles, issues with the state of the roads. And at the same time as we're arresting protesters, people aren't seeing action taken against the individual companies that are using the site, and that's only going to heighten tensions, isn't it? So I'd like to see what the approach being taken to that is, and say the legal advice on arresting members of the community. Thank you.
Over to Carl.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Again, I'll try to answer those questions for you. The first one in particular difficult because of the ongoing court cases, as you'll imagine. So I am curbed as to exactly what information I can or can't give on that. However, the legislation around Section 241, just for the wider audience, I'll just refer to it in terms of the subsections that Councillor was referring to. And the offence is committed if a person persistently follows another person from place to place, watches or besets the house or other place where that person resides, works or carries on business from, follows that person with 2 or more people in a disorderly manner through a street or road, uses violence or intimidation, and hides any tools or other property that somebody would use in their work. So each time we make an arrest, and I'll have to be general here, so please forgive me, each of those is considered dependent on the individual circumstances. and the offence that the individual appears to be committing at the time. In terms of whether or not we publish legal advice, I would seek legal advice on that, as you'd expect me to. We are transparent. We move even further towards being an open, transparent organisation. And certainly in terms of the protest, we've taken a no surprises approach. We've done our absolute best to liaise with protest organisers and facilitate lawful and peaceful protest. Where we've encountered difficulties is the difference between lawful protest and criminal acts that include obstruction and blockades. And that's the distinction that we've had to make where we've sought the legal advice. So I'll certainly see what our approach on that is. We don't normally publish legal advice, as most organisations don't, because of the privilege attached to that. But I do absolutely see your point and how reassuring that would be, not only to stakeholders, but mainly to the community themselves. Your second point, Councillor, if I could, absolutely agree with you. Again, I've had discussions with Red Industries and Walleys Quarry about the vehicles that visit the site, whether or not that's wearing seat belts, the roadworthiness of them. And you probably will have seen from Dr. Mick Salt a video that went onto Twitter where certainly one of the HGVs wasn't displaying a rear registration plate. That has been dealt with. The company have been contacted and advised in relation to that specific matter. And through Phil Duffy, we are in talks to conduct an operation with VOSA and our roads policing team resources to focus on that side of business as well. So hopefully that displays to you more than a fair and an impartial approach to what we're doing.
Thank you for that call. In the room, Marc Holland.
Thank you, Chair. The Environment Agency's been historically, I suppose, reluctant to pitch up on site, and we've heard tonight that they rely heavily on reports that are coming in from third-party organisations, including the CQA reports, and I'm sure they're extremely efficient at analysing all of the data that they receive from their offices and from their homes some distance away. But I wonder if the representatives of the EA who are with us tonight could summarise what interaction has been had on site. More specifically, I suppose, have they been physically present to inspect the site at any recent occasion? Will they be confirming any of the data that they receive regarding the laying of the posi shell covering? And secondly, in regards to the gas management plan, that has been approved, I suppose. Does the plan that's been agreed take into account what the EA has previously shared with us, which is that this landfill does not behave the way that other landfills behave? If that gas management plan has been approved, has it been approved on the basis that it would be a plan that's perfectly suitable for a normal landfill, or is it a plan that takes into account the fact that we all know this hole in the ground contains material that we don't believe ought to be there and is very likely to generate more gas than we would otherwise expect? And the closure to that question, I suppose, is I'm interested to learn that the telemetry is now being received or will be received from the processing unit on site. I'd be interested to know how it can tell you any data about the gas that it's not collecting, because that gas is very much still in our atmosphere and my residents are very much still suffering from it.
Marc, Claire.
Yeah, sure. I'll pick up those questions. So in relation to our officers visiting the site, we had officers there today. They were there last week and they were there the week before. So we do have our people going to the site on a regular basis, checking on the work, and that's the work with regards to the posi shell application, to the drilling that has started to take place now, and also to look at other areas, particularly where people have reported in issues, one of them being recently around obviously the bird control or bird issues and the pest management. So we do have people going out on site, and I can assure you that that will continue going forward as well to keep on top of the operator with the activities they're carrying out and the deadlines that have been set around that work. So they are constantly going out at a regular basis. And when they are going out as well, they are also doing kind of odour assessment checks, not just in the site, but also around the vicinity of the site as well, whilst they're there. With regards to the telemetry and the data, you know, that data is very useful with regards to telling us about the gas emissions from that piece of equipment, that gas utilization plant. And it does, you know, give us really helpful information, particularly when there is things that are not working correctly. So things like if there is any issues with things like the engine, you know, turning off when it shouldn't, it gives us the opportunity to understand exactly when that happens, you know, a date, a time, for how long that happens, and it then correlates to any issues that we may see with our air quality monitoring units, maybe picking up higher levels of hydrogen sulfide being emitted. And with regards to the point around the not just coming from gases coming or emissions coming from the gas utilization plant, it comes back to the point that Clare mentioned about earlier with the walkovers that are carried out by consultants for the operator to look at fugitive emissions coming from the actual ground itself. And those are carried out periodically. That data is sent to us, and we then can have a look at that data and see what, if any, hotspots, what we call hotspots, so those areas where we have found or can see with the data that there are higher levels of gas emitting from that particular part of the landfill. And then that then gives us a drive to then look at what actions we then imply and onto the operator to deal with that, whether that is through measures of things that we've spoken about in the past around the contain, which is capping.
I'm going to bring in Ken Owen.
Thank you, Chair. My question is aimed at the EA officers. I assume the permit that was granted to the landfill site was issued by the EA from day one. And I'm sure that there would have been terms and conditions on that permit. The smell and now the gas that's been sort of coming from this site goes back a number of years, possibly from the previous operator. And the EA granted a further permit to the current operator. We do not know, or we don't appear to know, what was tipped in that site a number of years ago. And yet the EA have renewed the permit. What sort of conditions would the EA insist on if they had to renew the permit this week? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I didn't obviously address you as Mr. Mayor. So Ken is our mayor for everybody listening. So over to Claire, perhaps, for that one.
Thank you, Councillor Tagg, and thank you, Mayor, for that that question. I mean, when we issue a permit, we have to look at a range of different things in terms of the impact, but also the legislation, and we have to take into account the complexities of overlapping legislation. So, for example, the planning permission for a landfill in this location, which is not something that the Environment Agency has issues itself, as you will be aware. The important bit, I think, here is about the odour condition. And that odour condition, as tested in case law, as set out in regulations, and as assured underneath the Regulators Code, all of which is set by government, and the Environment Agency then has to meet that, or has to regulate against those conditions for the government. That odour condition is about the activity that the operator does in order to stop odour from going beyond the boundary, because there is a recognition that there will be usually very short periods where it can't be stopped. So it is about the activity that they do in order to be able to bring it back in. And that's why our focus has been 100% on the activities to stop the emissions and to stop the odours that are clearly going on beyond the boundary at the moment. As we've said, we are doing everything we can to get the operator to bring those back in, and any changes in permits that have happened or that would perhaps be proposed will be with that in mind. It's also worth saying that the gas monitoring, the monitoring that is happening at those MMFs that Alec and Marc both spoke about in their presentations, this isn't the first time we've done it, but this year has been the first time that we have seen levels of hydrogen sulfide anything like we have seen over the course of 2021. Both previous assessments were, as I'm sure you're aware, much lower.
I'm going to bring in Amelia Rout, who's online as an attendee. Can you hear us and can you put your mic on and speak?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me too?
Excellent.
Okay, I had a question and a comment, if that's okay. My question was to Martin Hamilton. He just made a comment about the Walleys Quarry legal team not being available for the date that had been set with the magistrates. I just wondered if there was any sort of statute on limitations for how many times a company's legal team perhaps might be not available. And the second question was to our colleague from the police. I just wondered if he thought there might be any parallels between what's happening now with the Trades Union Act and the similar case in South Yorkshire where the police were found to have no grounds to use trade union legislation when they did in fact arrest some anti-tree felling protesters, it was at the time, in Sheffield. Thanks.
Thanks, Amelia. I don't know whether there's an actual statute of limitations on that particular issue. Clearly, the Magistrates Court would get very frustrated quite quickly if there was deliberate frustration around something like this. In this instance, we were offered a date at relatively short notice. Our team were ready to go. Unfortunately, Walleys Quarry Limited's team weren't, but I would fully expect that we'll be able to navigate our way quite quickly to another date.
Cool.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. Yes, each judgment that any court considers is obviously very, very different, dependent on all the circumstances of each individual particular case, and it's difficult at times to draw a parallel between cases because of the circumstances behind each one that are pretty unique. But I'm more than happy to meet you afterwards if that helps at some convenient date to talk it through as best as I can, like I say, without getting into too much detail because of the ongoing court cases.
Thank you, Colin. Now, I'm aware other people might have some meetings to go to later this evening, so we have, I'm going to take two more questions from within the room. So first of all is Stephen, followed by Sue Moffat.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, we see these charts saying it's sort of 2 or 3% is above the World Health Organization nuisance levels, which sounds really good, but it doesn't say how often it smells basically in the area, because okay, we don't want to be above it, but I don't actually want to smell it at all, and we never hear that figure. So on your little machines that you've got, have you got a record of when actually this percentage of the time in a week it doesn't smell at all? So I see absolutely no reason whatsoever why residents of Newcastle, one of which is me, have to smell rotten eggs. When I was a kid at school, you got little stink bombs of that stuff, didn't you? But I've grown out of that really now, and I don't really see why. Okay, it might not be a nuisance to me, but I really don't want to smell it at all. And have you got any figures telling us when it's actually is nothing? And is that hopefully what you're trying to come to eventually when this thing's finished? Thank you.
Marc or Claire?
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So, in terms of the hydrogen sulfide odours that are being detected outside of the boundaries, first and foremost, you will never have a landfill that will never produce any odours outside of the boundary. And that is something that we've always said from the beginning of this. But what is not acceptable is obviously levels of odour being detected outside the boundary that goes above what is classified as those World Health Organisation's nuisance levels. And that can be anything from hydrogen sulfide in this instance at Walleys Quarry, but also other gases as well. With regards to the percentages, obviously that's something that we just put in place because that correlates to the amount of time within the week that it goes above the nuisance levels on a 30-minute period basis. But in terms of the air quality monitoring units that are in place, they are constantly gathering data, and that gives us information, down to a much shorter time frame that then gives us the indication of when no hydrogen sulfide has been detected. So when you look at our, so obviously the figures that I put on the slide are just the weekly figures, but there's a much more comprehensive report that's produced on a monthly basis that comes from ourselves, and also a report that is produced monthly by, well, what was PHE, but now UKHSA, that gives much more level detail of how much hydrogen sulfide level, and also other air quality monitoring data that we gather. So things like methane, particulate matter, and BTEX is all within the report as well. So there is further explanation that gives those limits of when there is nothing being detected, to also when obviously it does pick up those detection rates.
Thank you, Marc. I think that the point Councillor Sweeney's making is he lives 2 miles away from the site. And everybody knows you're going to have odours from a landfill in the vicinity around it, but the extraordinary levels of odour that we've been experiencing over many months now, which are still continuing at that distance and beyond, is what is not acceptable. And I know you've said earlier what you're working to do to try and bring those levels down in a plan, but just to say this goes far and beyond what we would expect, as you know, Marc, and as you know, Claire, from a landfill. Distance and levels of odours have been off the scale. Sue.
Thank you, Chair. First question and statement is to the Environmental Agency. What I see is serial failings, appalling serial failings, that if action had been taken at the earliest opportunity, then we might not have seen the situation that we see today. And I won't go into detail because of the time limit that we have now, but I've been made aware by 2 residents who made complaints to the Environmental Agency back in January 2019, that's over 2 years ago. And the way that complaint was dealt with was quite frankly appalling, and the stuff that I've seen as evidence to that is incredibly distressing, including the Environmental Agency investigating officer sitting at meetings with Red Industries and suggesting that complaints of odour and smell had been exaggerated by the community. This dates back to January 2019, and this is where a missed opportunity happened. During the last 2 years, we have seen, and whatever it is that Public Health England is saying, or the Environmental Health Agency is saying in terms of long-term health, the long-term health of our community is already damaged. It isn't temporary. Being arrested is incredibly stressful and causes PTSD. The lack of action from the Environmental Agency, when they had the opportunity to step in and do things, has criminalised our community members, people who've never been in trouble before we've seen arrested. I want to know what you're going to do to investigate those failings. And I'd also like to say is that what is not acknowledged can never be healed. We're sat here very calmly presenting charts, talking about what we're going to do going forward. But we have got to this point now where our community members are incredibly distressed. They're having to go to court. They've had to travel to London. And like I say, whatever you think of odours and gases, there is permanent damage to the health of our community because of serial failings. So that's number one. And to the police, what I would like to say is I agree with Councillor Fox-Hewitt. When I've been at protest, particularly the community liaison officers have tried to build very good relationships with protesters. On the occasion when I had left and 40 police officers in very heavily kind of protected, and the second time with tasers, was incredibly distressing to see on our streets. And there is some need to make or rebuild relationships, particularly when every single day I know that community members have contacted the police about lorries lining up and blocking roads and causing hazard, and the police do not seem to be responding. And number two, when community members have had hands put on them by security guards at Walleys Quarry and the police have been made aware, the feeling is, so it's a feeling, is that the protesters are being treated one way and the security guards and Red Industries is being treated another. I'm really keen to make sure that you know it's the feeling is, because we have to deal with how we rebuild those relationships in our communities. And I'm sorry that those are two big points, but I really feel the need to make them.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you for the passion you put into those. First point directed at the EA, obviously Clare, and then I'll bring in the police to have their say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tagg, and thank you, Councillor Moffat. And I think the point you make at the end about that it is a very big question, and it is not one that I'm going to be able to answer in full or to your satisfaction tonight, I'm sure. But what I do want to say is that I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I have heard for a number of months, right since the very beginning of this, through the engagement with the community on social media, but also we've been present in Newcastle a number of times, and I've spoken personally to community members a number of times, as well as corresponding with them. So I absolutely hear what you're talking about in terms of the distress, and I take nothing away from what people are having to live with. I too have been very concerned about the mental health impacts, and that has absolutely been something that we've talked about at the SCG and been very, very mindful of. In terms of actions, the action on Walleys Quarry in terms of the regulation at the site and the intensity of that regulation did not start in January or February. The Environment Agency has been spending much more than it receives in terms of funding for regulating that site for years. And we've had that monitoring in place that I've talked about, and that monitoring, which has to be the basic evidence that we use as the starting point for the air quality, up until this year did not show us anything like the level of issue that we have now. We've also taken very seriously all of the reports we've had that we've needed to investigate. Now, I can't speak about individual circumstances. It would be wrong of me to try and guess what specific complaint or correspondence from community members that you're talking about there. But I assure you that nothing has been left. The focus now, though, has got to be on resolving the site. I've said personally our online engagement events, and I've also said it to residents, and I've said this repeatedly to Aaron Bellers, the MP, that just because we're not taking investigation action now or taking enforcement action against the operator now does not mean there won't be a time for that. But at the moment, our focus is on resolving the issue, and I make no apologies for that being the priority.
Bring Cole.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor, for the feedback and the comments. And I'll try and best to cover them as briefly as I can for you. The difficult position that we find ourselves in, and as you praise the protest liaison team staff who are engaging with the protesters, you know, sort of day in, day out at one stage, once it reaches a level where compliance isn't achieved, and those protesters who want to protest on the other side of the road quite rightly can go about that without any interference from us. We'll just try our best to keep them safe. Those that are intent on committing criminal offences, and I'll make no apology for this, will be dealt with. What they do is unlawful, and we will intervene and take action against them. So in that particular case that you mentioned there, I had those 40 officers as a contingency on standby. They were nowhere near that protest until the individuals who blockaded and refused all reasonable steps to liaise with them continued to blockade and act unlawfully, where I called forward those extra resources. Some of them will be carrying taser, and again, I'll make no apologies for that. That is part of their personal protective equipment, just as much as a baton, CS spray or handcuffs are. So I've got to ensure that officers, when deployed to a potential public order incident, are protected, and that equipment is part of their normal equipment that you will see them carrying day to day, either in the vehicles or on foot. So I suppose to sum that up, I react to what's presenting in front of me, and that's why those officers were deployed on that particular day, which led to the arrests that followed. In terms of the HGVs, again, we've liaised with Walleys Quarry. We've asked them to advise the drivers not to park there. What perhaps the community don't see is actually interacting with those HGV drivers and asking them not to park on the road and cause an obstruction. And again, that is going to form part of the work as we move forward with interaction with highways to see if they can put, for instance, double yellow lines or something else down to help assist with that. We've got 5 current investigations that are ongoing. Those are the matters that have been reported to us by members of the public. One of those is an assault, one of those is a hate crime, and various other issues that are currently under investigation. So we do take those matters seriously and act again without fear or favour, without disclosing who the victims or perpetrators are with those. And last but not least, that's how the community feels. Perhaps reassure you slightly, I'm Newcastle born and bred. I live in the borough, always have done, never moved out. So I understand Newcastle, I think, like the back of my hand. That's why I was asked to be the Silver Commander for this particular event, because I know the people and I know the area. So I get it when you say that's how people feel. That's up to us to rebuild that trust and that confidence with the local community and also the protest community as well. That's going to be done in part this coming Wednesday, when part of the protest groups are going to meet with the strategic coordination group members, and we can hopefully start moving things forward as well. But as of today, I will deploy protest liaison team, those officers that the protesters regularly see, and only as a last resort do I bring forward any additional resources.
Thank you, Carl. I think we'll call it to a close there. I think if there's any more questions, there is the event tomorrow afternoon at Bradwell Lodge, where all the partners will be available to answer any more questions. But thank you to the EA, to Health, and to the County Council who are online, and to the police, and to the Borough Council officers in the room, and also to Cristian at the end there, who's been flicking around with the presentation and making sure everything works like that for us. And thank you to everybody for attending, and we'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you.